I would like to ask Tracy Chang to join us into the conversation, because she will, I'm sure, she will take this reflection farther. She has been working in Boston from Pagu, her restaurant, in the midst of this pandemic, trying to find ways to connect business owners to the crisis so that they use their creativity to be responsible and keep their businesses running. But this is not the only reason that we invited her today to take part of this conference, but also because from that experience of her, I wanted to ask Tracy, when it comes to sustainability, or to try at least to be sustainable, do you think the restaurant industry is sustainable? Can we shape it into a more sustainable system? Welcome, and thank you for joining us from the United States.
Thank you, Sasha. All right. Yeah, that's a very good point, very good question in terms of the future sustainability of our industry. So I wanted to go over kind of what we've been doing at my restaurant, Pagu, in Cambridge, Massachusetts here for the past few months since COVID hit our neighborhoods in March. And hopefully we can explore that question together. All right. So before COVID, this is what life looked like at Pagu. There were no masks. There were a lot of events. We were at the peak of our kind of little restaurant existence in this hub. And we were doing weddings, corporate banquets, wine dinners. And, you know, life pre-COVID was really about feeding people who want to eat. You know, people who can afford to eat, people who had read about our restaurant and traveled from Spain to Boston, or from, you know, Sao Paulo or Copenhagen to Boston, and they wanted to come eat here. We served the community. That's what we said. We were about food, community, and collaboration. And what that meant to me was, you know, to put something delicious, put something socially responsible, you know, something humanely raised on the dinner plate, on the table, to share that, to share those experiences, to share the stories of the makers with these people. And, you know, we held a lot of events with our friends in Harvard Science and Cooking, you know, with winemakers, with sake producers, etc. And that's what food, community, and collaboration used to mean to us. And since COVID hit in March, you know, that's really transformed. There's a picture here of me in the restaurant. It looks very different. There's a photograph of the grocery market that we started, you know, turned kind of into this e-commerce business. There's a picture of pizza because everybody eats pizza, right? You know, we really transitioned to feeding people who need to eat. So what does that mean? You know, Pagu was always supposed to be a place for everyone, whether you're a student or a professor or a young entrepreneur, an artist, a visiting, you know, scholar or tourist. And you know, and then life changed very dramatically in March, and we never actually shut down in terms of serving our community. It's just that we had to redefine what it meant to serve our community. And as a chef, as a restaurant owner, as a community member and organizer, to me, that meant feeding the people who need to eat. So at the front lines, you know, of COVID in March, there was a need to feed frontline healthcare workers. COVID-19 had spread very quickly, very rampantly in Boston, in Cambridge, pretty much throughout the Northeast. Boston, New York were in very, very difficult positions. How did I know about that need? My father is a pediatrician. I have a lot of friends who work in sciences, and they were the ones telling me that, these hospitals are becoming inundated with patients. And so I got an email from one of my regulars, and she had this idea and this name called Off Their Plate. And it was a very simple idea. It was to feed frontline healthcare workers and employ restaurant employees to do so. And that way, restaurants, which we anticipated would be hurting for the next 18 to 24 months, even more, they were going to be in a crisis very soon. And so how could we help both parties, right? How could we maintain the supply chain, the sustainability of the supply chain? We were saying that, flowers flying off the shelves and toilet paper, but people weren't really buying this produce and this meat and, these other ingredients. And we wanted to make sure that our local farmers, our suppliers, our purveyors, that the chain didn't stop. And so we developed this recipe. $10 was one meal. Okay, how many other restaurants could we get involved in Boston? How many other restaurants could we get involved in New York City? San Francisco is getting hit, LA, Chicago, Seattle, all these major cities where I had friends, and Natalie, my co-founder and friend, had friends. And so we thought, okay, well, let's create a system, let's create a recipe, a template, standard operating procedures that everyone can follow regardless of which city they're in, and they can also feed their communities. Because if we're just feeding people in Boston, that's great. That's a good starting point, but why don't we create something a little bit more scalable? And very quickly, between March and July, that turned into 200 plus volunteers in just this organization in 9 cities nationwide, over $6 million raised from individual donors, from corporations, from folks pretty much all over the world, as very creative fundraising tactics, I must say. There was the Goo Goo Dolls who wanted to throw a virtual concert. There were young high school students reaching out to our organization saying, I want to donate my prom dress money to help you raise money to feed these people in the hospitals, in the healthcare centers. And they're not just doctors and nurses. There's people that clean the hospital. There's hazmat. There's all kinds of folks in the front line. We partnered with World Central Kitchen with Jose Andres and Nate Mook to be our physical sponsor. And it was just incredible how quickly we could mobilize our, local and national communities to do this. And we were able to do it because we had a solid recipe. This was a photograph I took one of the first days. That we prepped, just 90 meals to Brigham and Women, right? People say, how do you start something like that? How do you get everyone on board? How do you activate folks to do this? And during a time where there's so many unknowns, you don't know if people are safe doing this. How do you guarantee they're safe doing this, right? And so we talked to scientists, we talked to doctors, we talked to public health experts about how we could be as safe as possible. And we continued that conversation, made sure that we had the PPE, made sure that we were creating these procedures to be as responsible as possible and not be part of the problem. And this recipe worked in terms of, people were able to follow this nationwide, and they shared the same mission. They wanted to help. And it was probably in our advantage to be one of the first movers. And I must say that we were different from some of the other organizations that you might have heard of, feeding the front lines or frontline foods. Mostly because I mean, I, as a restaurant owner, I said, this is important that we ask these restaurants and ask their essential workers, what do they need? Right? We know that they can cook food and get it to a hospital, and that they can do that in a short time window and at an incredible, volume. Um, but what do they need from us? Like, yes, they need the $10 per meal. So how many meals do they need per week to make sure that this makes sense for their employees, that this makes sense for their business? And so I developed an economic, model, a very simple one-page spreadsheet that calculated that. That was a tool for these restaurants to all tell us how many meals they need to make each week so that their employees can be okay. They can continue to have these employees on their payroll, have these employees coming in. And I think it was a combination of timing and luck and just some common sense. But really, it was the power of the community and these networks that helped us be as successful as we were. And thankfully, the need declined eventually for healthcare feeding. But we realized that there was another growing need. These essential workers, these restaurant employees, these hospitality employees, these immigrants, they still needed our help. And actually, their families were becoming COVID positive, were becoming food insecure. And so, with another friend, Marina Lin, Irene Lee, Lily Huang, we created this second initiative in May called Project Restore Us. And we thought, okay, how can we take, that kind of model off their plate? And how can we tweak it and make it, a little bit better, a little bit different, right? And so we still need to help these restaurant employees, help these restaurants stay afloat. The need is actually for these families to be fed. But these families, they have elders, they have diabetic, safety was even more important. So we had volunteers delivering food door to door. We realized that some, pickup locations where people were just bulk dropping off meals or receiving meals on the weekends, they were creating bottlenecks. Everyone was, not 6 feet apart, and that 6 feet is completely arbitrary. So we recreated, a better recipe to reach these families in need. $45 gave us 35 pounds of food, fed one family of 4 for 1 week. Since May, we have fed over 800 families, 150,000 pounds of food. We've brought on 4 restaurants, all owned by female immigrants, people of color, and we've had over 50 volunteers drive these culturally appropriate groceries door to door to each household. And really, it's a matter of caring. And it's a matter of designing these boxes to make sure that it makes sense for a Chinese family, and that a Chinese family might not be receiving the exactly same box as, say, a Haitian or a Latinx family. And as a chef, usually we design dishes, not grocery boxes, right? But I must say, like, it's extremely satisfying to design a grocery box that is culturally appropriate, within budget, and really going a longer way than just one meal at a time. This is feeding people for 4 to 6 weeks at a time. And so now we're in November, and COVID is still rising in the US as it was in March. And people are still without jobs, or people are with 2 to 3 jobs. They're as desperate as ever, and this need continues. And, it really makes me rethink the role of chefs, of restaurant owners, of cooks, employees, our neighbors, our community members of these corporations. All of these people have banded together during this time to do something for the greater good, to feed people in need, not just people who want to eat, right? My friend Eric Bruner Yang here created the Power of 10 initiative. There's so many other organizations that have sprouted up during these COVID times. And you might be wondering, how do you do something like this in your community? And these are kind of my takeaways. You know, surround yourself with people that are motivated to do this kind of work, to solve these problems, to figure out, you know, the difficult answers sometimes, and to ask more questions, to listen to the science, and to be focused on safety at all steps along the way. And importantly, very, very importantly, is to listen to the feedback and be flexible, right? Like, we're not just prescribing what we think people need and however amount of food we think people need. We're actually partnering with organizations who have been around. They know these families. They have surveyed them to understand their need. And we're getting feedback after we send out these grocery boxes. Was that enough food? Did that food make sense? You know, is it nutritious? It doesn't make sense for, you know, diabetics? Does it make sense for elderly? Does it make sense for celiac, etc.? And we've actually found that our food, you know, what we originally say budgeted for 4 weeks, actually lasted 5 weeks. And so, you know, there's valuable feedback there, and listening is so important. And if you develop these, you know, as I say, kind of recipes, these standard operating procedures, these SOPs, you can train other people how to do this. You can scale this. You can empower other people. And all you have to do is start small in your neighborhood and have, you know, a bigger vision to grow it outside of, you know, just the four walls of your own restaurant. And I think what's important is that we as restaurant owners, you know, what is the root of restaurant? The root of restaurant is to restore, right? The etymology of restaurant is to restore. And how will we as restaurants, as chefs, restore our environments? You know, people ask us all the time, will you continue these initiatives post-COVID? What will new normal look like for restaurants, for chefs? And I think all that has changed. I had no idea I would be starting 2 nonprofits in my 30s. It's like, oh yeah, one day, you know, I'll do that in my 50s, 60s. I mean, I guess I don't really know what I plan to do in my 30s. I didn't, you know, winning awards isn't like what I wake up and try to do every day. And it's not even really about like making a beautiful plate of food and creating something new on that plate every day. Really, it's really about the people, right? It's about taking care of other people. That is what gives me joy. And to know that we, as chefs, as restaurants, as community members, as humans, can take care of people because people always need to eat. That is what gives me joy. And that is what, you know, new normal looks like for me. And so, you know, we plan to continue these initiatives post-COVID for as long as needed. And we hope that other restaurant owners, that other game changers, other community members take on that responsibility as well and put safety first. Thank you.
So thank you, Tracy. Thank you to share with us all your Restorers project and all your thoughts and examples to us. So we're very glad to have you here with us.